The courtroom sat in a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the faint, rhythmic ticking of a wall clock somewhere in the back, as if time itself were counting down to an inevitable moment, a moment suspended between judgment and mercy, justice and pain, hope and despair. Every eye was fixed on the man in the defendant's chair, a figure who seemed to hold the weight of countless stories behind his tired, weary gaze. James Carter, a disabled black veteran whose proud military uniform had long since been replaced by a hospital gown that hung loosely over his frail frame, concealing the scars that mapped the battlefield etched into his legs, a brutal reminder of the sacrifices he had made on foreign soil for a country that now seemed to forget him in his moment of need. His hands rested on the arms of the wheelchair, knuckles white with the effort of holding himself steady, as if the very act of sitting was a victory over the pain coursing through his broken body. The judge, an imposing figure draped in black robes with sharp eyes that had likely seen 1,000 cases and 1,000 faces, suddenly banged his gavel with a force that echoed through the cavernous room, commanding silence with the authority of law and tradition. His voice rang out, cold and unyielding, slicing through the tense air. "Stand up, Mr. Carter. You will stand during your sentencing." The words hung there, sharp and demanding, igniting a ripple of murmurs and gasps. Among the packed courtroom spectators, lawyers and press alike, some whispered in disbelief, others in quiet outrage, while a few simply stared, uncertain how to process the cruel irony of the command. James's frail body trembled as he absorbed the judge's demand. The years of hardship, the pain that never truly left him, the memories of war that clawed relentlessly at his mind, all collided in that one moment of forced defiance. Slowly, painfully, he began to move, every muscle aching, every joint protesting as he struggled to obey the order. His fingers gripped the armrests of the wheelchair tightly, knuckles whitening further, as he summoned every ounce of strength and willpower he had left to lift himself up. It was not simply a physical act. It was a monumental battle against the invisible enemy within his own body, nerves shattered by explosions, bones fractured and never quite healed, muscles atrophied from months and years of struggle. The courtroom was a mix of emotions. Some saw only a defendant, a man accused and on trial, but others saw the worn and broken figure of a hero, someone who had given everything, only to be treated with this cold demand. His attorney leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper, imploring the judge to reconsider, citing the man's disability, the trauma he carried, the medical documentation that proved the impossibility of standing for any significant time. But the judge's eyes narrowed, and his voice cut through the courtroom like a blade, sharp and final. No exceptions. Time seemed to slow as James, with a painful grunt, began to lift himself from the wheelchair. His legs, once strong, pillars of a soldier's endurance, now trembled and buckled under his weight. The muscles quivered uncontrollably, the joints locking and unlocking in spasms of agony. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he fought to maintain balance, his breathing, ragged, shallow, each inhale a laborious task. The silence was nearly deafening as every person in the courtroom watched the fragile figure struggle, the lines of pain etched deeply on his face, the flicker of defiance and dignity shining through the exhaustion. Cameras clicked softly from the press seats, capturing the moment that would soon be etched into headlines and conversations nationwide. A disabled black veteran forced to stand despite the agony that threatened to topple him. The air grew thick, heavy with the weight of injustice and the bitter sting of hypocrisy. This was the very embodiment of the sacrifices many soldiers face, wounded, forgotten, forced to prove their worth, not on the battlefield, but in a courtroom where empathy seemed a foreign concept. As James finally steadied himself, the gavel struck again, signaling the beginning of the sentencing, but the courtroom remained in a state of collective breath-holding, the atmosphere charged with a strange mixture of reverence and outrage. Behind the facade of legal procedure, beneath the sterile veneer of justice, a deeper story unfolded, a story of a man fighting not just for his freedom, but for recognition, for dignity, for the simple humanity that the system had so cruelly denied him. The judge's gaze softened momentarily, a flicker of doubt or remorse flashing across his eyes, But the weight of his role demanded firmness, and so the sentencing began, words flowing in a cadence both cold and official, unaware or unwilling, to acknowledge the full magnitude of the man before him. Outside the courtroom, unseen but felt, a community of veterans and supporters held their breath, praying that justice would be tempered with compassion, that the scars of war would finally be honored, not dismissed. This moment, the judge ordering a disabled black veteran to stand during his sentencing, was more than a courtroom drama. It was a reflection of society's ongoing struggle with race, disability, and the true cost of war. A reminder that sometimes the greatest battles are fought far from the battlefield, in places where courage must overcome cruelty, and where dignity demands to be recognized even when it is hardest to see. The harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom seemed to flicker and waver in James Carter's vision, but what truly haunted him was not the present, but the relentless torrent of memories flooding his mind, visions that crashed over him like waves from a stormy sea, pulling him back to the battlefield where the very essence of his life had been fractured and remade in fire and blood. He saw himself in the thick of combat, the deafening roar of gunfire and explosions ringing in his ears, the acrid smell of smoke and burning flesh filling his nostrils as he pushed forward with his unit through hostile terrain, each step heavy, with fear and determination, knowing that every moment could be his last, yet driven by an unshakable sense of duty to protect his country and his brothers in arms. He remembered the chaos when the landmine exploded beneath his vehicle, the searing pain that tore through his legs as metal and earth shredded muscle and bone, the desperate cries of his comrades echoing around him as medics rushed to pull him from the wreckage, and the agonizing ride to the field hospital, where his future was rewritten with every surgery and every sleepless night filled with pain that no words could truly capture. But even as the physical wounds began to heal, James knew the deepest scars were etched into his mind, a constant replay of sights and sounds that no soldier should ever have to endure, a gnawing, relentless terror that haunted his waking moments and invaded his dreams, the cruel ghost of PTSD that whispered of death and loss when he least expected it. Returning home should have been a relief, a chance to rebuild a life, but instead it marked the beginning of a new battle against a society that neither saw nor understood what he carried inside. There were nights spent homeless, shuffling between shelters and park benches, his body broken but his spirit unyielding, the pain of rejection and isolation almost as sharp as the wounds sustained in combat. Now sitting, or rather standing under duress, in the sterile courtroom, he was confronted with yet another form of conflict, one fought not with weapons, but with words and judgments, a battle for dignity amid accusations that threatened to erase all he had sacrificed. The judge's cold demand that he stand despite his disability was not just a physical command, but a symbolic blow, a stark reminder of how easily society dismissed the price paid by veterans, especially those like James who bore visible and invisible wounds. Despite every fiber of his being screaming exhaustion and defeat, James stood trembling but resolute, drawing on a reservoir of strength forged in the crucible of war and hardship, the courtroom a battlefield of its own kind. The prosecuting attorney stepped forward, voice sharp and accusing, laying out the details of the case with clinical precision, portraying James as reckless, dangerous, a man who had violated the law and must face its full consequences, ignoring the complexities and the humanity behind the charges, the countless struggles that had led to this moment. Murmurs began to rise among the audience, some filled with sympathy, others with skepticism, as the crowd caught glimpses of the man behind the accusations, a figure whose spirit shone through the pain and fear, a silent plea for understanding, for recognition, for the simple dignity that had been stripped away. In that tense room where cold justice was supposed to be blind, the line between punishment and compassion grew hazy, blurred by the raw reality of a life fractured by war and hardship, and the profound question of how society measures justice for those who have already suffered so much. As the prosecuting attorney detailed every misstep and every moment of trouble James had found himself in, a montage of memories flickered behind James's eyes, faces of lost friends, the sound of helicopters overhead, the feeling of earth shaking beneath his feet, and the nights of despair in a cold city that offered little solace. He felt the weight of judgment not just from the law but from every person in that room, a suffocating pressure that threatened to break him. Yet somehow, beneath the trembling exterior, a stubborn flame of resilience burned, a testament to the man who had survived the horrors of war and refused to be defeated. The courtroom became a crucible of conflicting emotions, rage at the injustice, sorrow for the broken soldier, and hope for a moment of mercy that might transform the narrative from one of condemnation to one of healing. As the voices echoed around him, James's mind raced through a lifetime of pain and perseverance, and somewhere deep inside a quiet resolve took root to stand not only physically in that courtroom but spiritually against the tide of indifference and judgment, demanding that the sacrifices of veterans like him not be forgotten, that their humanity be honored even in the harshest of trials, and that true justice be measured not just by the letter of the law, but by the compassion it holds for those who bear the scars of battle both seen and unseen. As the judge prepared to deliver the sentence, his gavel poised above the sound block, the courtroom held its breath, tension so thick it felt as if every heartbeat was a thunderclap, when suddenly an unexpected voice broke the silence. A voice, steady, firm, and filled with the weight of lived experience, that of an older black man seated among the spectators, a fellow veteran whose eyes bore the same scars of battle and whose posture radiated a quiet dignity that commanded attention. He rose slowly, the room's chatter immediately silencing as all eyes turned toward him, curiosity and surprise mingling in the air as this man stepped forward and addressed the judge with a commanding yet respectful tone. "Your Honor, this man has already stood tall in battle. He's paid a price we all understand." The courtroom gasped, an audible collective intake of breath that rippled through the spectators, the attorneys, even the judge himself, as if these simple words had shattered an invisible barrier, cracking open a door long sealed by rigid procedures and harsh judgments. The judge's stern mask, so carefully maintained throughout the trial, momentarily faltered, his eyes softening as they shifted from cold scrutiny to a gaze laden with empathy and recognition as they settled on James Carter, standing there, trembling and struggling, yet unbroken and dignified against all odds. The room seemed to hold its breath again, as the judge's voice, usually so commanding and unwavering, faltered just slightly, revealing the internal conflict raging beneath the surface, a battle between the letter of the law and the undeniable human truth before him. After a brief, heavy silence, the judge called for a recess, stepping down from the bench with a deliberate calm, leaving the courtroom abuzz with whispers and glances as people processed the gravity of what had just happened. Outside the courtroom doors, the whispers turned into murmurs of respect and solidarity, spreading quickly through the crowd like wildfire as stories of James's bravery and sacrifice began to circulate, connecting strangers in a shared understanding and renewed admiration for a man who had already paid so much in service to his country. Veterans exchanged knowing looks, nods of approval, and quiet conversations acknowledging the invisible wounds soldiers carry home, wounds not easily seen but deeply felt. When the judge returned after the recess, the atmosphere in the room had shifted palpably. His tone, once cold and rigid, now carried a weight of humility and contemplation, signaling a transformation in the way justice was about to be delivered. The sentencing no longer felt like a mere punishment, but a call for redemption, healing, and the recognition that justice must include compassion for those who bear scars beyond the physical. As the judge spoke, his words conveyed an understanding that extended beyond legal statutes to the profound human cost of war and trauma. James listened, tears brimming in his eyes, as the courtroom witnessed a rare moment of true humanity within the halls of law, where a man's sacrifice and pain were finally honored, not dismissed. The ripple effect of this moment was undeniable, as hearts softened and the cold machinery of the court was momentarily infused with grace, reminding everyone present that sometimes justice is not blind, but deeply aware of the stories behind the faces before it, that healing can begin even in places built for judgment, and that the strength of the human spirit can inspire change in the most unlikely of places. The courtroom, which had held its breath for hours, suddenly seemed to exhale as the judge cleared his throat, the stern lines of his face softening into something unrecognizable, yet profoundly human, and with a voice that carried the weight of years of experience, but now trembled slightly with empathy and understanding, he began to speak. "James Carter, your service to this country is undeniable." The words rolled over the room like a wave breaking through a long-standing dam of silence and judgment, stirring emotions in everyone present, from the hardened attorneys to the jurors, from the skeptical spectators to the press who sat poised to capture every moment. The judge's gaze lingered on James, who stood there, body still trembling, tears glistening on his cheeks, his weary eyes locked on the man who held his fate, as if searching for a sign that the burden of years of pain, sacrifice and struggle might finally be recognized and honored. "While you must face consequences," the judge continued, his voice steady now, but filled with an unexpected grace that echoed through the courtroom, "it is clear you have already paid in ways that cannot be measured by the law alone." Those words struck like a balm to the raw wounds beneath James's stoic exterior, the acknowledgement piercing through layers of despair and silence that had long clouded his heart. Then, in a moment so rare and profound that it caught everyone off guard, the judge slowly removed his robe, folding it carefully and stepping down from the bench, crossing the distance to James with deliberate, measured steps that spoke of respect and humility. The tension in the room melted into a collective silence, heavy and sacred, as the judge extended his hand toward the veteran, a gesture simple yet monumental, bridging the gap between authority and shared humanity in a way that transcended legal tradition and transformed the courtroom into a place of healing rather than condemnation. Eyes brimmed with tears, lawyers who had argued fiercely moments before, jurors who had wrestled with their own judgments, spectators who had come expecting spectacle but witnessed something far deeper, and for a brief shining moment, the courtroom ceased to be a place of judgment, becoming instead a sanctuary where dignity, compassion, and grace reigned supreme. James, overcome by the flood of emotion, allowed tears to stream freely down his face, the heavy weight of years, of pain, loss, and unspoken sacrifice, lifting just a fraction as he reached out and accepted the judge's hand, the contact, warm and grounding, a silent promise that he was seen, that his humanity was honored, that justice could hold mercy without losing its power. Outside the courtroom doors, the news spread like wildfire, a story reshaping the narrative around veterans, disability, race, and justice, inspiring conversations about the true meaning of service and sacrifice, about the importance of empathy in law and life, and about how even the most rigid institutions could bend toward compassion when confronted with undeniable truth. Advocates and activists seized upon the moment, sharing James's story, to highlight the struggles faced by disabled veterans and to push for reforms that would ensure others would not be forced to stand alone in their battles. Communities rallied around James, offering support, recognition, and a renewed sense of hope that the wounds of war, both visible and invisible, could be healed through understanding and respect. And within that courtroom, long after the gavel had fallen for the last time, the echo of that handshake lingered, a symbol that justice is not merely about punishment, but about restoring dignity, that courage takes many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful victories are won not on the battlefield, but in the quiet, profound moments when people recognize the humanity in one another.